I've never used the Canon R50, but ask and you shall receive. The R50 is tiny, but can it keep up with the big boys? I really hope that there is some wildlife out in the marsh today, because I feel like whenever I need there to be something, it's a total ghost town. Basic info for this camera. This has an APS-C crop sensor, which means that it's smaller, so it's not going to do quite as well in low light as my full frame camera, the R6, and it also will crop any of your lenses, any of the focal lengths that you put on it, by 1.6 times. For example, on the R50, a 28mm lens effectively becomes a 44.8mm lens. Into the bush, as the Aussies would say. I'm not Australian, I'm very American. Oh, duck. So having a crop sensor, this APS-C sensor on this camera, is actually a good thing in general when it comes to animal photography and candid photography. It allows you to step back a little bit more without sacrificing cropping in and sacrificing that resolution on your final photo. I think I got a good enough one of that guy. Now this is a completely meaningless thing in the grand scheme, but I have to say, the shutter sound on this camera, oh dude, it's so nice. Wow, this thing is small. It's almost uncomfortable to hold with my man hands. Like I feel like I'm gonna drop it. This is a big benefit, I guess, if you're doing like travel or hiking photography, because when you slap a 28mm pancake like this thing on it, it's almost pocketable. But I mean, not really, but almost. There's a little bird. This EVF is actually really nice. Especially for such a cheap camera. It's very crisp and clear, and even despite the small size of the eye hole there, it's plenty to cover my eye and to like block out the light. So if you like to shoot through an EVF, this is a good option. One cool thing about this camera is it has Canon's RF mount, which means that you can go ahead and invest in all of the best lenses that Canon has to offer, and then just upgrade your camera body down the line while the lenses are still going to be super high quality. That way you don't have to replace your lenses as well as your camera body once you kind of graduate to a higher level of photography or videography or creating or whatever you're doing. I've been sticking with the 12 FPS first curtain shutter burst for animals, because it's really pretty much enough for most things. As well as like sports photography, I do the same thing. And that first curtain shutter burst, that gives you less distortion than their mechanical or their electronic shutter. So even though you can get a few more frames per second with the electronic, I'm gonna stick with the first curtain. The R50 has 3 different autofocus modes, which is person detection, animal detection, and vehicle detection. They work really well. I mean, it's Canon software. It's the same sort of software that's in all of their most expensive cameras, so you can rely on this when it comes to autofocus. I was impressed at it recognizing and catching even just like a little bird that I was shooting earlier. Now, it doesn't have anything fancy like 30 FPS burst shooting or like a pre-shooting mode that you find on the more expensive cameras, but it's also kind of a beginner budget camera, so I wouldn't expect that. It also doesn't have image stabilization though, which means it's going to be really hard to get those longer exposure, longer shutter speed photos without a tripod, because there's going to be a lot of handheld shake introduced without that internal stabilization. Let me see if I can get this duck. I pulled focus to that little guy really, really well. He's a pretty little duck. I'm not much of a pixel peeper, but from the photos that I've already taken with the R50 and what I've seen, it takes really high quality photos, basically just as high as my R6, which I'm filming on right now. And honestly, in today's day and age with how good technology has gotten, I don't see why it wouldn't. So photography, thumbs up. Man, it's so freaking hot out, man. I'm dying. I really feel like all that test proved to me was that basically every camera on the market, even the cheapest ones, are really good at photos these days. It's the video features that set them apart. For content creators, the R50 has really everything you could hope for on the hardware side, which for me is a pretty short list. The flip pop-out screen is absolutely imperative for like filming yourself, which is what most people do. Plus, of course, it's super small and light, which makes it really inconspicuous when you're filming in public, and it's just a really lightweight package to carry around if you're traveling, blah, 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 you know the spiel. There is digital image stabilization in the R50, which I'm filming on right now, but it does introduce a crop, which gets more and more drastic depending upon how stable you'd like your footage to be. I also kind of feel right now that I'm fighting against the crop factor of this APS-C sensor because so much of YouTube is filmed with a wide angle lens. You'd have to put on like a super wide, like 10mm lens on this R50 to match the look of a 16mm lens on my R6. Here's the R6 at 16mm, and this is the R50 with the same lens. It's a pretty massive difference. As far as image quality goes, the R50 shoots up to 4K 30 frames per second or 1080p at 60 frames per second. You can even bump that 1080p all the way up to 120 frames per second in their high frame rate mode, but I'm kind of unsure of whether that's going to introduce any like negative effects on the image quality. So I took a test video with my dog of the 60 frames per second and the 120 frames per second to compare them to see if there's really any loss of video quality in the full HD mode, and honestly, looks really good. I mean, I'm kind of pixel peeping it a little bit and just haven't noticed much fall off when it comes to the quality of the video, which is a positive thing. 120, very usable. Getting high quality video is really only one part of the picture though, because most cameras shoot great quality video these days. That means to set your projects apart, you need to use super high quality assets in all the other facets of your project, which is why Artlist is my go-to site to source stock footage, templates, sound effects, and more. They have a massive library of restriction-free music that you can use to soundtrack your videos, plus they just released an incredible new AI voiceover tool. Whether you're creating a real estate video, documentary, faceless YouTube channel, or advertisement,
Artlist's voiceover tool can create a natural sounding monologue that fits your project.
All you have to do is pick your favorite voice from dozens of options and type in what you want it to say. The AI takes the rest. I've used this before on my own projects and it's really impressive, like scarily impressive. Artlist really is a one-stop shop for any of the creative assets that you need to create a video like this or a documentary, and all of the songs and sound effects that you've heard in this video come from Artlist, so I really can't recommend them enough. I like using them, and I think you will too. I have a link down in my description below that'll give you 2 free months added on to your subscription to Artlist, so go check that out if you're interested. Thank you, Artlist, for sponsoring this video. Now let's go back to talking about the R50. As a videographer, the R50 starts to lose some ground. This is where I've got to get a little bit more techie. First of all, the 4K on this camera actually downsamples from its 6K sensor, which gives it a really nice, crisp, sharp image. The problem is all of this internal computing to downsample really generates a lot of heat. Testing time. First, 4K 30 FPS. We'll use Ned as our little test subject here. Oh, there we go. It overheated at 38 minutes, roughly 38 minutes, which is not that long. I wonder about 24. We should check 24. Man, only 40 minutes. It's kind of tough. You know, I did know that this might be an issue because in vlogging with it earlier, I was keeping an eye on the temperature and it was getting kind of warm just through regular vlogging, regular filming, which was not super long periods of time, but then it adds up and you get to like 30 or 40 minutes. I can see this overheating thing being a big problem for pretty much anybody other than sort of beginner or casual creators, because you really can't risk having a camera go down or overheat when you're in the middle of a wedding, and it would totally put a huge logjam in my video production day if I had to stop recording every 40 minutes and let it cool down. That said, for higher quality productions, especially like wedding videos, you probably want 4K 60, which this thing doesn't shoot, so you'd want to get a better and more expensive camera anyway. Thankfully, there's no overheating in the 1080p modes though, so if you're willing to shoot 1080p and your clients want 1080p, they're fine with that, then this is actually a good option because the image quality that comes out of this, even at 1080p, is really good. Another downside to the R50 is that it doesn't shoot in any of Canon's log color profiles, which means less dynamic range and less flexibility when it comes to color correction and color grading in post-production. This is really a deal breaker for me when it comes to professional productions. Like, it kind of just allocates this whole camera to the creator, the social media bin. That's sort of what this is designed for. It's by no means a cinema camera. So who is the R50 for? Well, I think that it's a great hobbyist photo camera if you're taking pictures with your family or any of that sort of stuff and you just want like a good, solid camera. This is a good way to go. It's also a great camera for any creators trying to do their first investment into getting a high quality new camera body. This is a good way to go. But if you want something that is going to be sort of a good hybrid professional photo and video camera, especially if you're doing sort of client projects or you have any desire to get into client projects like wedding videos and that sort of thing, then I would go with one of the more expensive but much more capable options higher up on Canon's R lineup. Something like the R6 Mark II would probably be the best like entryway into the semi-pro area. That said, if you have a tight budget for the price, it's really hard to beat because the R6 Mark II is like $2,500 and this thing is under $700, I think. I currently film on the original R6, and if you want to hear my thoughts on that camera, you should watch that video right up over there. I have pretty mixed opinions on it. It's not the best.